Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. We're going to be talking about scaling damage above and beyond modding. Um, I made a reference to something yesterday when talking about building out your weapon, and I was asked to expand upon it. Um, Obviously, this is for people further into the game, for people that have played a long time. You're going to recognize some of these builds because a lot of these, though they are deemed pretty unnecessary and overkill. I'm just going to go over scaling specific weapons, say like melee, primary, secondary. I'm going to give an example of each. Um, and just explain for people that don't know. So if you're an experienced player or just want to know like maybe a small refresher, uh, feel free to click through it. Obviously, if you don't want to watch, don't watch. But newer players, this might be vastly new information for a lot of you. Um, Especially with the new Zeramon arcanes and everything. Um, so let's get to it. We're going to talk about scaling melee. I've set up a couple of builds as like examples just to sort of get the juices flowing. Say you're running the Venkas. Really classic level cap weapon. But people were asking how to get your damage to sort of like the next level, if you will. Because it's pretty unobvious when watching like YouTuber builds how exactly the mega damage is done. And the long and the short of it is there's additional multipliers that they're probably not explaining. Like say Focus School, for example. Right now I have Vazarin. Really, really good for Protective Dash. That's the go-to. Protective Sling gives you a heal, and Guardian, which is kind of a meme. But with this, it provides you with 150% shield regen, and regen delay is reduced by 90%. For frames with very, very, very tiny shield pulls, this can actually basically act like an Aegis, where it's constantly regenning shield fast enough that you end up with like a semi-permanent shield gate. This is the mechanic that say like a Grendel or a Gauss can heavily abuse. And with the recent Gauss bus, I don't even think he needs it. But I know Grendel still uses this to level cap pretty easy. So focus schools are a big deal, especially if you see somebody. Which one is it? There's one. I think it's Matter. I actually, now that I think about it, physical damage and operator damage increased by 30%. This applies to IPS, so impact, puncture, slash. So this can, if you're doing a slash build, you kind of, and you want to deal damage with whatever the slash is, you kind of have to default off of this. Obviously, Void Strike is kind of meta for doing damage with your operator. But just keep in mind, if you're doing a build and you're like, okay, I'm doing hella damage, or I'm doing the kind of damage that I want to see, and then you swap to say like a Vazarin or like a Zenuric, you're gonna take a DPS loss if you're relying on like a slash build, right? So keep in mind with stuff like this, these are pretty important. That's why a lot of times they'll mention, oh, we're using this specific focus school. But a lot of times you'll hear like, oh, we're gonna do Naramon for combo counter ease. Not that that's really that big of a deal now because you're only going to 12x. It's not like it's the infinite stacking like it used to be. But you'll hear like Xeneric for energy management, or like Vazarin for protective dash, that sort of thing. Or like armor strip. But a lot of these like hidden bonuses are really big deal in terms of total DPS output. So for Ashe, we're going to swap over to Matter Eye, show the physical damage. We immediately do 30% more physical damage. So, doing a slash build with melee. We're going to be doing Venkas. These are slash based. Obviously, if you're doing a level cap run, Rivens are wonderful. Condition Overload, Blood Rush, Gladiator Might, Weeping Wounds, Range, a Smite mod. I've been seeing more and more like YouTubers sort of talk shit about Smite mods. Obviously, like if it's like a endurance player, like they're gonna be familiar with Smite mods, or if they do like disruptions, and that's sort of like their gag. But I've been seeing quite a few people like straight up say, "Oh, they don't like faction mods on principle." The people in the clan and the alliance, get comfortable with these. It's a massive damage increase, even if you're running like a corrosive build. If you end up with a Riven that saves you a mod slot, and you're running Condition Overload, the faction mod just gives you more damage after like 2 statuses. Okay? After Prime Pressure Point is good below 2 statuses, because let's see, it's pretty simple. You get 80 melee damage per status type affecting the target. So obviously going from like no statuses on your initial hit to your second hit, provided you've procced a status, you will have statuses on the enemy. Is an 80% increase. But after that, the next status, so it would be 2 statuses, because it's not 100%, right? If it was 100%, then it would be double, then the next one would be a 50% increase. So with 80%, once you get 1 status increase, because the first one's 80%, the next one, actually, let's do a little bit of math. Okay, so 100% plus 80%. Okay, so then we would have 180. Then you would do 100 plus 160. You would do 260 minus 180. And then 80 divided by 180. That is not right. 80 divided by 180. So the next status type would provide you with a 44.4% raw damage increase in terms of like base damage. Well, a faction mod gives you 55. And if you were to compare it to like Prime Pressure Point, which is 165, since these stack additively, it's literally the equivalent of just getting 2 status types. It would give you a 50% increase at 2 status types. Prime Pressure Point would equal or double your damage. But that's like a 50% increase, so the Smite mod still wins. And with as easy as it is to proc statuses, Condition Overload, unlike Prime Pressure Point, doesn't help you. Condition Overload doesn't help you your very first hit. So if you're trying to one-bang something, Prime Pressure Point's the way to go. Other than that, is if you're regularly proccing statuses, Condition Overload is clearly the way to go. Because I think we're up into the 20s in terms of unique status types that we can proc. right? There's a ton of them. But anyway, so let's talk about scaling. Base damage, crit chance, crit damage, a utility, and as much utility as this weapon needs, it's literally a range mod. It's a straight up DPS increase. Attack speed, faction. Hopefully you got a nice juicy riven, otherwise run organ shatter here, and weeping wounds because we're using condition overload. So this would be like a higher level disruption build for the Venkas. And it's kind of a meme, but I'll show you the damage. Even with no statuses, this can hit 11 million on a slash proc with a heavy attack. So just from raw damage with like no statuses or just like a basic viral, which is a big deal in and of itself, you can do hella damage with these. But let's talk about ways you can scale your damage. So with melee, you have 8 mods. There's no arcanes. There's no Exilus slot. The stance itself can be a very handy multiplier. You have to Google this because it doesn't show you what the multipliers are. So check the wiki when you're looking at stances. Like if I'm doing a build, I would Google Vermilion Storm, 4 Riders, Malicious Raptor, and read what the damage multipliers are. The wiki provides charts with what the damage increase is. And these affect your DPS also. You also have to keep into account like sweeping motions, like a 360 motion like Vermilion Storm has. But Malicious Raptor, the reason why this is more of a disruption build, is Malicious Raptor has a very quick pop, pop, pop at the beginning, and its standing auto has a ton of forced slash procs on it. Not as much as Stinging Thorn, the dagger stance, right? But it's still got a ton, and enough that even if I wanted to, I would it has so many forced slash procs on it, I would actually have the option of taking Weeping Wounds on here and applying Prime Pressure Point or another crit damage mod, like Organ Shatter. I could do this because the stance has so many forced slash procs on it. So you have to consider this and what the utility is. Obviously, if I'm running through and just trying to mow down enemies down in like a base steel path, these builds are all like hyper sweaty level cap runs. This is the stuff you have to get used to doing. And obviously Venkas are a great example of a level cap weapon. So if you're able to then export your status application with a primer onto another weapon, like say a pistol, which is the meta for like applying a ton. I think the Nucor and the Epitaph are still meta. The Sea-Doo is also a fantastic option. You can then remove a mod from your weapon that does that job, further scaling its damage, but it requires more steps to get your damage back, right? If you're running Weeping Wounds, you have the option of just running through and just killing stuff, and the weapon will kind of self-sustain. But if you don't need the weapon to apply statuses, you don't need Weeping Wounds. And because the stance that we have force proc slash enough, we can just skip Weeping Wounds if we wanted to. Well, I want a ton of slash procs. Give me as many of them as you want against the Grineer, right? So I leave Weeping Wounds on, but just so you know, this would also be an option. You would have to figure out what your tolerance is to it. But Malicious Raptor is a monster of a stance for slash. So just keep that in mind. You can also do that. So how do we scale the damage even more? If you want to do a melee build, if you want to have like a really comfy late game build where you never feel like your damage is falling off, you have to do a little bit more. And the most popular one is applying Arcane Strike. Its attack speed, if you notice there wasn't any attack speed on the weapon, you can export or double down on attack speed. And this gives you enough attack speed that you can then run Berserk with practically Berserker. So, one more time. Berserker with literally no consequences. But you have to have the arcane available. Now, one of the good things about this is we're going to be using Ash for this example. Is Ash really just doesn't need that much to be able to do a level cap run. And especially with the shards. Just doesn't need that much. Obviously, with this build, if you feel like you need even more damage, I would suggest running like a single casting speed shard, and maybe one energy orb effectiveness shard, but then just run as the 3 melee crit damage mods to further boost your damage. And 3 base red Tau shards, or 3 regular red Archon shards, not Tau shards, will give you 75% crit damage, which is more than a Gladiator might, though it doesn't give you the crit chance. But an Organ Shatter gives you 90% crit damage, scaling off the weapon's base crit damage. But we can do better, right? You have the Glad set, and to further increase our damage, we will figure out exactly what the frame needs to survive. Whatever frame you're running, some require more mods, some require next to none. Revenant is an example. Ash is an example. They just don't need much because they have things in their kit that, and Nidus would be an example. Ash has invisibility, Revenant has Mesmer Skin, Nidus has his passive and iframes. These, when you're thinking about doing a level cap, the first thing that you need to do is to be able to survive. But if you find a frame, and I encourage you to read through all of them, I know it's 50, but you got to be familiar with them. If you find a frame that has like a gimmick or like an ability that allows it to get like a get out of jail free card or 2, start thinking about that frame as a potential level cap frame. Like, Revenant's a really, really easy one. I hope you all farm that, because they're already talking about Baruch. But to further scale a melee build, we can then equip mods on our frame that further boost the weapon that we want to deal damage with, to further increase it. Now, we have plus 50% crit chance per combo multiplier, which is insane. So this will give us 550% crit chance, scaling off the base crit chance of the weapon, and the Venka's already got good crit chance to start with. So this is going to be tier 4, and I think it's going to be a guaranteed. Sorry, hold on, not tier 4s. It's going to be guaranteed tier 2 reds, with a pretty good chance of tier 3s. And each time, once you get over the first crit damage, once you get solid yellows, every time after that is a 40% increase in damage. It's no longer multiplicative unless you're doing Eidolons. So it's free damage each time it goes up, right? So this is another way to further boost that damage. So primaries, just to sort of throw it all together. Primaries, if you're trying to boost primary damage, you need to be thinking arcanes on your frame. You need to be thinking Warframe ability augments. In particular, if you want to do like a primary carry and you enjoy Nidus, you're very familiar with the primary crit chance augment. you need to look at what arcanes you have. And obviously, for me, I have all the arcanes. So for this one, for melee, we have attack speed and base damage. Because Ash, to me, just doesn't feel like he has enough health to really justify the Avenger setup. But that is also an option. Running a really light condition overload, or not condition, combat discipline. Yeah, condition overload build. It's always going to be a condition overload build. Running a really light combat discipline, so you run like an unranked or maybe one, depending on your capacity needs. And then you run Avenger instead of maybe Fury. If you're really comfortable with getting multiple stacks and being able to rely on condition overload a little more, Arcane Fury is stronger than a prime pressure point, though, by like 15%. So, food for thought, but this is how you would scale a melee build. If this is what you want to be doing, your damage to, like, say, a Demolist, where you want to be able to one-shot it or heavy attack it and walk away and it just dies, right? And don't pay attention to the Eclipse. You would want to go Roar. So let's get our tanky boys. Let's see how the melee build does. Tons of attack speed. Alright, let's do a quick attack. 119k, 53... 281k, 120, 767k, 48k, 126k. And the good thing about this stance is the low hit is actually the first one. Because the hit is so fast, the first hit will apply statuses, which will buff the remaining ones. And obviously the viral's doing us some favors. You would want to take the Panzer, or one of the other Vulpithylas to scale your damage even further. Because a free viral is always handy, regardless of the faction. Viral is one of the universal elements, where it has a universal benefit, because everything has health. Alright, 960k raw, that wasn't a dot. But you have to keep in mind, like, there are going to be some Demolists that have innate damage reduction, so you're going to have to whack them a couple times. But with the Venkas, Venkas are one of those weapons where you can have a reasonably easy chance of hitting damage cap on it. Even with a slash build on melee, because there's just the 13x heavy attack obviously does work. It's going to put in a tremendous amount of extra damage. So this is how you would scale as an example, is you figure out exactly what you need for that weapon to deal damage and figure out what your utility mods are. And you remove all of the utility mods and try to equip stuff that further boosts the thing that allows your weapon to do damage. And you try, eventually you'll just have no utility, like you don't have to run Vice. I could take that off and put something else here if I want to. Weeping Wounds can go. But it's such, for me, it's such a nice quality of life having the extra attack speed. And especially with Strike, plus 60%, Gladiator Vice, you get I think it's like a 1.8 attack speed. Hold on. I hit 2. Okay, so it's a nice 2.0 attack speed. It feels really good. Um, but I could rely on strike to give me attack speed and then put another mod. Like, I could, if I wanted to, run prime pressure point here. Obviously, the forma cost of these builds keeps going up, right? But there's a bunch of stuff that you could do. So you start with your base damage, crit. If you're doing a level cap, hopefully you're using a crit build against the Grineer with slash. Or you're looking for a weapon that deals hella status and has a ton of multi-hit. You can do that also against like the Corpus and do like a Toxin build. But you really want that multi-hit and you really want that super high status chance. But this is how you would scale this weapon. So you figure out exactly what you need to get the weapon going. And like, say for example, like the thing that's contributing to damage mostly is these 5 mods. Now, obviously, the other ones provide benefits because the Gladiator Vice has the crit chance per combo multiplier bonus, and there's a total DPS increase. But since I have exported the attack speed, the plus 30% really doesn't matter as much because Arcane Strike is on the frame. So how much of a benefit is it really giving? Because it's 40% crit chance per combo multiplier still. I lose the slight decrease. I could put Organ Shatter on, right? Especially with Disruption. The name of the game is killing the Demolist. You're not worried about really killing enemies too much as far as like keys. So keep in mind what your options are. Damage, crit chance, crit damage, and then utility after that. Just figure out what gets the weapon going, how you need to deal your damage for melees. If you end up with a weapon that has a stance that gives you freebie procs like Malicious Raptor, you can then even remove Weeping Wounds, which is honestly a core part of the combo counter quick attack build. And if you're doing like disruptions, you really don't even need range. I've seen people do level caps without range mods. Because the entire philosophy is like if you have a stance, say like Vermilion Raptor, Vermilion Storm, not Vermilion Raptor, Vermilion Storm has an AoE spin that it forces your frame to do. You could do a build that was maybe a little heavier on the attack speed, and you could use movement speed to be your pseudo range, where you just move quickly. And you moving is what's giving you the effective range increase, right? So you can modify your build however you want. Just experiment with it. But the Condition Overload, Blood Rush, Organ Shatter, attack speed, Weeping Wounds, Primed Reach is still the go-to for a generic build. And you would either go single element with a faction mod and then go double crit damage if it's slash. Or you would do the same build that I said before. Condition Overload, Blood Rush, Organ Shatter, Berserker, Weeping Wounds, Prime Reach, Organ Shatter. And then do the 2 elemental mods that give you the correct element to deal with the enemy that you're going up against. So for melee, that's kind of what it is. You would swap out and you would add gladiator mods to your frame once you figure out exactly what the frame needs, and it's really, really useful. Like, say, even with Ash, you can run this exact same setup with, like, for the frame itself, with a Toxin dot build. But you would have to put Weeping back on the melee. And you would just heavily lean into Toxin. And then you would swap out Eclipse for like a Nourish Helminth, which is from Grendel, for even more Toxin damage. Don't forget your Helminths. So for melee, this is sort of how it's done. This is obviously a pretty old build. Um, Young whippersnappers wouldn't know anything about a build like this. This is sort of a Melee 2.0 build, right? But this is how you hyperscale and hyperfixate on a specific stat. If you're doing level cap stuff, you are not concerned with anything else but buffing the damage type that you need to kill the enemy that you're going up against. You literally don't care. If there's something that helps or boosts that damage type, it's on a primer. So you wouldn't mod and do like a corrosive heat melee. That's too many mods being taken up because that requires 3 mods unless you're working with one of the few melees that has like viral or corrosive innate on it, right? So if you're doing a heat build, you don't care about anything else but heat being on the weapon. If you're doing a corrosive build, corrosive's the only thing on the weapon. Obviously, that requires 2 elements, so 2 mods, so it's 1 less. But if you're doing a level cap, you literally don't care about anything else but what allows you to do that damage type. Because you need the scaling. It's not so bad that like you need this entire setup, but this is how you would scale it further. Oh, obviously the heavy attack. Let's see the heavy attack. All right, 7.7 million. So 7.7 million slash dot with just viral. Obviously, that's a big deal. But it wasn't a properly primed enemy, right? So 7.7 million on a slash dot where the only status on it, I think it has slash puncture and viral. So 3 condition overload procs. It wasn't a properly primed enemy. With like an epitaph where it had like 7, 8, 9 statuses on it. So with 3 condition overload boosting procs, it did that much damage. If I had 6 statuses on it, it would do double damage. If I had 9, it would have done 3 times the amount of damage. So, food for thought, this is the melee. Now let's go to primaries. And this is a super good example. We're going to use Nidus. Here we go. This is for shotguns. The build is the same as an example. Tempo is for shotguns. Acceleration is for all the other primaries. So the thing that allows Nidus to scale fairly hard, Nidus has never had an issue surviving because he has his passive, and especially with this augment, Insatiable. If you're comfortable not having Insatiable, but to be honest, Insatiable is an amazing utility. It allows you to recover your stacks faster than your passive. Like literally 1 or 2 ones, the virulence, the little gross thing he shoots out, and you've got your stacks back almost instantly. Even with Intensify, if you don't have this, you would do Transient Fortitude. Now, if you notice, there's a lot of things. The only thing that Nidus really needs is stacks. And that means he's alive. That's literally it. And you basically need things that help you get stacks. And Nidus will be alive. Obviously, kill rate is an issue for survival, but it should be for you, if you have a properly built Nidus, almost impossible to die at any time in the mission except for the very beginning when you don't have any stacks. Like, there just isn't much you can do when you revive and you don't have any stacks because you died. You have to get stacks as quickly as possible. So, like, Protective Dash is pretty useful. Or Rolling Guard puts in work because he can't shield gate. Literally 0 shields. So, with that exception, once you get going, you're on your bicycle, you're basically in a mission for as long as you want. So, one of the augments, and this is the one I was referencing earlier, is Nidus has an augment. Hitting 4 enemies with his 1 grants 120% primary weapon crit chance, and this scales with strength. So right now we're sitting at 250% crit chance. This is scaled off of the weapon that you're using's base crit, or base crit chance. So say for nice round numbers, if you have 10 crit chance on your weapon, that means it has 35, right? Obviously, the more crit chance, the better, and you get the luxury of leaning into 100 munitions builds. The more crit chance it has, right? But Nidus is pretty easy to get a good chunk of strength on, especially because he gets a free 15, because he's a special snowflake. So you do have the option, if you don't have one of these arcanes like Rage or Tempo. I think, I haven't done the math on this, but I'm pretty sure with most weapons dealing additive damage with the galvanized mods plus the primary arcane, it might actually be better to run the stacking strength for the extra crit chance. But don't quote me on that. I have to do the math on it. But this is like a more old school build with Arcane Rage. You're going to be spamming your primary. We're going to be using the Kuva Comb. Tons of bullets, tons of fire rate. You're going to hit a headshot because you're bullet hosing grouped enemies. The thing that allows us to kill faster is range. It groups more enemies. Obviously, keep in mind for the Eximus, right? So, this would be an example of a scaling build because we're taking advantage of the frame's innate survivability, adding Rolling Guard for a second oh shit button. And then we even equipped Vigilante Pursuit on here for the additional crit chance on the primary, because the other one really doesn't do anything. It's for shield recharge, which is whatever, right? So keep in mind this mod exists. If you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, this would easily slot up here, right? So the weapon that we're using, Vigilante Offense, for additional punch through. I like this better than running the multi-shot, because we're going to be killing with enemies grouped in his 2, so they're all going to be bunched together. I like the punch through. If you don't have it, it's not exactly a common drop. Obviously, go with the multi-shot. The weapon, like the weapon that I'm using, has an 8 punch through. So it's up to you how you want to do this. Punch through, if you're running grouping abilities, punch through becomes more valuable when you're getting guaranteed multiple hits on multiple enemies because they're lined up. And Vigilante Supplies, if you really want the crit chance, honestly, this just puts in so much work, and especially with the Kuva Comb. But this is a Barrow mod, so you might not have it. Vigilante Supplies, really cheap, and is practically the default. But other than that, crit chance, crit damage, even got a nice little ribbon for it. If you don't have this, run fire rate. Or you could fit the Vigilante armaments here. The only reason why I would say run double fire rate is specific to this weapon. because it has a spool mechanic. Faster you get things spooled up, the more you're pumping out damage. But for a regular weapon, even like a Bratton, you wouldn't run a fire rate mod because they have a high enough fire rate to begin with. So, faction, crit chance, crit damage, multi-shot, status chance, scaling base damage, additive to primary merciless, and the thing we're going to be killing the enemies with. So we're doing whatever we can. All of these mods boost the slash proc damage or make it easier to apply more of them with the multi-shot. More multi-shot, more chances to proc slash. Crit chance increases our tiers. Crit damage increases the strength of the slash procs. Faction double dips on the entire thing. So this is sort of the philosophy behind it. But I haven't equipped like a couple things to this because it's on the frame. And if when I shoot, you're going to notice I'm going to be hitting oranges fairly regularly. But at a minimum, it's going to be mostly yellows. So you can see 24. What was it? I'll try to read some of the numbers. Uh, 5 digits and above, but they're disappearing so fast because there's just so many of them. But using this, you can basically turn any weapon into a crit weapon. Even what used to be Old Faithful. You could do something like this because we've exported viral onto the Panzer. We now don't need to mod for it. So it's going to be the same thing as before. Crit chance, crit damage, multi-shot. Everything on here is to boost the slash damage. Even going with a heat dot. One of the things you could do to maybe change it up a bit is you could run like a corrosive AoE weapon with a tiny AoE. And I'll show you that. To help with the procs. I am a big fan of the Bosmu. So, easy enough. Nice little 260k dot there. The Bosmu has always felt really, really good for this. I've done a ton of longish missions. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours with Nidus and the Bosmu and use this as my killer. You can even run Galvanized Scope for the extra crit chance and like the RNG of killing something with raw damage because you're grouping so much. You could also run Prime Shred for the punch through and purely for the punch through. You could also do Vigilante Offense. So let's see how this does. It's got a tiny little AoE. It's also got electricity on the primary hit, heat on the AoE. So even with the electricity not having the benefit of elemental mods, because we're grouping, just went screw it and did it without it. So food for thought on this also. If you've got a gimmick on the frame that allows it to stay alive, there's nothing wrong with running a primary or a secondary that has a gimmick of its own. Like battery-based weapons are super nice. Like, I can get away with running an unranked vigilante supplies, because like a fully ranked or a prime rifle ammo mutation literally does nothing. So I can get away with running like odd modding setups because I'm taking advantage of the characteristic of the weapon. So this would be a heavily boosted weapon also. I'm not having a mod for elements. Though, to be honest, I could probably do pretty well modding for electricity. Taking advantage of the fact that it's a dot, so I've got the faction mod, even got a nice little ribbon. If you don't have Vigilante Offense, again, and you want to try this out, run Hammer Shot. More electricity is still more damage. Crit damage boosts the electricity and the slash damage. And actually, let me show you that real quick. So 3K. Let me do that again because I don't think I used the augment. All right, one clip. Almost killed everything. Alright, 2 clips. Obviously, it needed a little bit of time to scale. But Hammer Shot might be more your speed. If that's what you want. Because regardless... I'm not going to say regardless. Slash will always deal damage to Grenier. But electricity, frankly, gets freaking murdered by armor. So unless you're running like a heavy grouping setup, I wouldn't recommend it. You could also probably get away, because of the nature of the weapon, get away with running a toxin mod. But that's because we're not having to worry about like fire rate. That mod's somewhere else. It frees up essentially 2 mod spaces, which is a big deal. You could even get away with, if you really want, you could even take Galvanized Aptitude off here. It's an additional bonus, but it is not providing us with the DPS bonus that's doing most of the killing. It's the grouping action. So you could get rid of that, slot Hammer Shot here, and let's do that. Actually, let's see how that does. Let me get more energy. I lost my buff. As with most things, if the arcane isn't stacking, existence is kind of pain. All right, now let's check it out. So we're seeing about the same dot damage, but because we're not running the Riven, there is going to be a performance difference. You could then slot something here that's more of a utility aspect, but this is just giving an example of how to move some of the damage off. The slash procs of things actually getting hit as the group sort of like wiggled around, if you will, those slash procs were getting boosted by the galvanized aptitude, and we were getting more dots from the extra status chance, so that was increasing our DPS. But if you were looking to like min max around this, say like a Kuva Shakur or something, you would be looking more for like guaranteed procs. Guaranteed procs, that's not that. Oh, the Nagantaka. Right? You can run like an internal bleeding. I mean, the thing already hits. So hard. Obviously, the ideal is an AoE weapon with this setup, but still does damage, right? So with that, you would try to do punch through to increase your damage, punch more into the pack. So you could take off like a vigilante armaments and put like the punch through mod on. And this would increase your damage because you would be hitting more of the group enemies than normally. But that would be for that specific setup. So you figure out exactly what you need. Like you need multi-shot, you need crit chance, crit damage. In order to force the slash procs, you need internal bleeding. Because we're going to be killing with slash procs. You would take a faction mod. And essentially everything else would be utility. So then you would build around that. So, food for thought on that. Now let's do secondary. Let me do the easy example. Saren, let's be honest, Saren buffs everything. Okay. So it's a buffer Saren. The sad thing is that there aren't really any sets that buff like damage or like damage in terms of like a buff over time. But there's two ways that you get compensated. You get a very nice fire rate arcane velocity, 120% fire rate to pistols for 9 seconds, and it triggers on critical hit. So anything with an AoE, this is basically up 100% of the time. And even then, it has a 90% chance to proc, so it's up most of the time. But the damage increase is on reload, which is super nice. Because you're always going to be reloading, especially if you're doing like a primary carry. Say you want to do like a new core. You're always going to have to reload, right? Other than that, you would just move most of your damage off the weapon onto anything else that you can possibly get it onto, and once you get a big enough buff, you can then do like crit chance, crit damage on the weapon itself. If you're running like a hero, you would try to fit base damage and elementals to min-max onto the weapon itself, because hero can always get crit onto something. That being said, if you're doing a raw damage build and you're not worried about status chance, you would go base damage, fire rate, crit chance, crit damage, and you wouldn't give a crap about status chance. You would just use the bullet hose aspect to get your status chance up, right? So you wouldn't worry about like dots too much, because Harrow, and say like the Nell is notorious for being able to apply, even with very poor status chance, just the status chance galvanized mod and like 260/60s and the bullet hose aspect. Within like a second or two, you're going to be able to melt something, even level cap. So it depends on what you're playing. But with Saren, she's an easy level cap frame, especially buffer Saren with as a weapons platform. Multiple ways of boosting your damage. Even have roar on it. Toxic Lash is going to be our primary source of damage. So we're looking to get scaling damage. Roar dips a couple of times on this build. So the multiplier is insane. We even are running, where's that? Venom Dose. So her 1, besides the spores, which are always good, gets 300% extra damage, 298, in terms of pure corrosive. So it's more right now, and it's not even like as high as you can get the strength, but like right now, it's still better. It's still better than running like 290 mods by a lot. It's almost twice as good in terms of the amount of corrosive damage weighting you get. So Saren, just keep in mind if you're doing a primary melee or secondary build, you can always cheese stuff using protective dash and just go to level cap. It's kind of sweaty, but it does it. In terms of damage increasing mods, the only one that I can think of is the synth set. Let me check. Using the Kuvasir. Was it this? Let's see. Damage. Alright, you have 60/60s. Yeah, 200% bonus damage on final shot. Honestly, this is up to you if you want to use this. If it's a weapon with a really, really small ammo magazine, it depends on how small it is. If it's a single shot and then you reload, doesn't even apply. But if you have 6, it's a good chunk of damage, especially if you're running like a dot build. But you can offload by running velocity. You can offload your fire rate onto there, easily allowing a faction mod to be placed. Even though I'm running corrosive heat on this build currently, you could further take stuff off and mod for something else. You could even throw more base damage on and get rid of heated charge like I have now, and it would still come out ahead, because you're looking for as hard a hit as possible to scale Toxic Lash, because that's how we've boosted the weapon damage. So that's how you would scale that. That's the easy way. There is also Valkyr. Sorry, not Valkyr. Zephyr has an augment that provides base damage. It is not multiplicative. But through the use of her tornadoes, Zephyr is an excellent weapons platform. Though she can still have some issues because she's very squishy. For pistols, Zephyr is a very good option also. Because of airburst rounds. Each enemy hit by airburst increases secondary damage by 25% for 14 seconds. Um, you can run a secondary carry with Zephyr fairly easily. Um, so this would be another candidate for a secondary carry frame where it would hyper scale your secondary. So the just to recap, so we can close this off because we just hit the hour mark. Um, the way to scale and make obviously there's some favoritism toward melee in terms of the available set bonuses. Is you would try to offload as many mods first and foremost based on whatever you have. You would try to offload as many mods as you can onto the frame or onto the sentinel. Next, you would start removing mods from the frame itself, provided you can replace it with a mod that buffs the weapon you're trying to do damage with. So with, like, say, the melee build, right, with Ash, there's so much that's buffing this, and I didn't even put the aura on. Like, this would cause it to do more damage, and I think I did like a 7 million slash proc. This would boost it even further. But Brief Respite is really comfy for level cap runs. So we have the 8 mods on the weapon itself, the stance, so 9. We have the 2 arcanes that gives us 11 things buffing, plus the 3 gladiator, which brings us to 14. So there's 14 things that we've equipped, where normally we would have 9, that are buffing the damage of the thing we want to do damage. And by doing this, by having as many mods and as part of the frame, and then you have like helminths to think about. Like if you were doing a slash build, you would do Rhino, and you would do even more damage. And because you start multiplying bigger and bigger numbers, you could, like, say that 7 million slash proc I did. If I had Roar on, with like a bit of power strength, the slash dot could have easily been in the 20 millions, which is safely into level cap territory. So for stuff like that, if you want to hyperscale, you need to look at what your options are. For a lot of you in the clan and alliance, consider farming mods. Mods are how you get stronger in the game. Arcanes are how you get stronger in the game. But this is how you would scale, like, say, a melee build. With primary, the vigilante set is significantly weaker than the gladiator set. But because it calculates independently on each instance of damage, still ends up providing a pretty substantial increase. Having 1, even 2 vigilante mods will provide a decent enough increase to at least at a minimum justify their existence. Like vigilante supplies or vigilante armaments, the multi-shot one. If you are running like a bullet hose weapon and you really want the prime damage mutation, vigilante pursuit for enemy radar with the multi-shot mod is always a good option. Because the fact is the shield regen one is just sort of out of place. So for primaries, that's how you would do it. Secondaries are the hardest to boost, but it would be more frame dependent. But you, at a minimum, you would still get the 2 arcane slots. And then on top of all of that, you also have generic damage increases. So you would also have like if you're running a primer setup, say with the Venkas, you would run like a primer to get statuses. Like your pistol would be a primer, so you would constantly be swapping back and forth from your secondary to your melee. So one of the things you could do to further increase your damage is do vigorous swap, which provides additional damage. So for stuff like this, you can further increase it with generic multipliers. And then there's also for the heavy attack builders, there's also Arcane Arachne. Has a really long buff on it, but that gives you another nice generic buff to everything. So there's plenty of ways to do it. So for the people in the Clan and Alliance that are considering doing longer runs and you're wondering how people are doing more damage, like one of the guys that I was talking to was kind of in disbelief that I was hitting for millions of damage. And the fact is I talk about it all the time. And then on top of it, you have the stance multipliers, and God forbid you get a headshot with it. Like a headshot crit is a 6x damage multiplier, and say it's on a portion of the stance that has like a 300% damage increase. Well, that's 18 times the damage. So all of this stuff incorporates together, and it produces ridiculous damage. But consider these mods. There's plenty of set mods that do really fancy things. You don't have to follow the gospel builds that you see on YouTube. Feel free to experiment. Lord knows I have. Take your time, spend a little bit of time in the simulacrum, but not too much. And I say that coming from somebody who spent too much time in the simulacrum. But this is also, keep in mind, this is the way to further increase your damage also. And most of the time you don't need to run 3 Glad mods. Like Gladiator Finesse, it's just not a meta mod anymore. It was more important when like Arcane Energize didn't have a cooldown. And you would run that one plus Quick Thinking with a large energy pool and like adaptation or rolling guard or something with Arcane Energize. And you would just like constantly trigger a shit ton of health, because Arcane Energize would give you like max your health or max your energy pool, and then the efficiency between Gladiator Finesse and Quick Thinking. If you had 500 energy, every time it triggered, it was basically like 1500 health. So you would run like tank and like adaptation, and it would be like 15,000 effective health every single time Arcane Energize procced. And it applied to Arcane Energize procs from your teammates also. So it's sort of an older mod, but Gladiator Resolve or Gladiator Aegis, you even get the set bonus if they're not ranked up. So if you pick one, you get one, you're doing a Cetus bounty, pick one up. You can just throw an unranked one on. And it would also help doing that with to like help with like the forma cost if you're trying to stay free to play. So this is a couple of examples. Besides the mods directly on the weapon, you have mods on the frames. You have arcanes on the frames. You even have, if you're doing a physical damage build, you even have the focus school. You also have armor strip now. So these are ways to further increase your damage. So all things in due time. I hope this helps. Check out the wiki. It's a great source of information, but there's damage for every weapon. I mean, what was it? Dystopia level capped with a Mark 1 Bratton. And I've done the Mark 1 bow. Like it's super easy considering the crit chance is so high. You just run a 100 munitions build. So, food for thought. Have a blessed day, guys. Stay groovy. I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a blessed day.